Welcome, dear listener, to another gentle journey through the shadows of history. Tonight, we invite you to settle back, perhaps pull a soft blanket closer, and allow your mind to drift into a world locked in ice and snow, where survival depended on the simplest yet most crucial act of all, finding food. You are safe here, in your comfortable present with refrigerators humming quietly in your kitchen and grocery stores filled with abundance, as we explore a time when every meal was a victory against starvation and when the hunt for sustenance shaped every aspect of human existence. Imagine yourself transported back 40,000 years to a world where massive glaciers stretched across continents like frozen oceans, and where our ancestors moved through landscapes that would seem utterly alien to us today. The air is crisp and biting, filled with the scent of pine and the distant calls of creatures that no longer walk this earth. Here, in this harsh yet strangely beautiful world, we will discover how humanity not only survived, but began to thrive, one carefully gathered berry, one successful hunt, one shared meal at a time. The world you are entering tonight is one of extremes, where summer might only bring a brief respite from cold, where water existed mostly as ice, and where the very act of chewing required careful consideration of precious energy reserves. Yet within this seemingly barren landscape, our ancestors discovered an intricate web of life, learning to read the subtle signs that meant the difference between feast and famine. They developed tastes and techniques that would seem both familiar and utterly foreign to our modern palates. Picture the steam rising from a piece of meat held over glowing embers, the careful way weathered hands crack open nuts with stones worn smooth by countless repetitions, the patience required to wait by waterholes where animals might come to drink. These were not merely acts of survival, but the foundation stones upon which human culture, cooperation, and ingenuity were built. Every successful meal represented not just calories consumed, but knowledge passed down, techniques refined, and communities strengthened. Tonight's journey will take us through 4 distinct chapters of this frozen world. We will begin by walking alongside a small band of hunter-gatherers as they face the daily challenge of finding food in the tundra, feeling the weight of empty stomachs and the relief of discovery. We will then follow the remarkable story of a particularly innovative group who learned to read the patterns of migrating herds, their lives intertwining with the great beasts of the ice. From there, we will uncover the mysterious rituals and surprising sophistication of Ice Age cuisine, exploring cave paintings that reveal not just what they ate, but how food became art, ceremony, and culture. Finally, we will contrast the lives of successful hunting leaders with those who struggled on the margins, understanding how even in humanity's earliest chapters, food was never just about survival. It was about power, status, and community.
The landscape we will traverse tonight is painted in shades of white and gray, punctuated by the warm glow of fires that represented islands of life in an ocean of cold. You will hear the crunch of snow underfoot, the whistle of wind through ice formations, and the comforting sounds of human voices sharing the day's discoveries around those precious flames. You will smell the rich, fatty smoke of roasting meat, the earthy scent of roots pulled from frozen ground, and the sharp, clean smell of snow that has never known pollution. Please consider subscribing to the channel and hit the like button. It motivates and helps me keep bringing videos in this format. If you'd like to hear about a specific topic, leave a comment below, and I'll show you in the video when your topic is chosen. The horizon glows pale and silver as dawn breaks over the endless expanse of tundra, and you find yourself walking beside Keth, a weathered hunter whose breath forms small clouds in the frigid air. His footsteps make soft, crunching sounds in the snow-crusted grass, a rhythm that has become as natural to him as heartbeat. The landscape stretches before you both like a vast, white ocean, dotted with islands of darker vegetation. And in the distance, you can make out the familiar shapes of his band's temporary shelter, 3 lean toes constructed from mammoth bones and hide that have served as home for the past several days. Keth pauses, crouching low to examine tracks in a patch of softer snow. His fingers, gnarled from decades of exposure to cold, trace the outline of what you gradually recognize as cloven hooves. Reindeer, perhaps, or the smaller Arctic deer that have been growing scarce as the season progresses. The tracks are fresh, no more than a few hours old, and you can see the way his eyes brighten with the possibility they represent. Food has been increasingly difficult to find as winter tightens its grip on the land, and the band's carefully hoarded supplies of dried meat and rendered fat are dwindling with each passing day. You follow him as he rises and continues forward, his movements deliberate and economical. Every step is calculated to conserve energy while maximizing the chances of success, a balance that has been refined through countless hunts over more than 30 years of life. His spear, crafted from a straight length of wood and tipped with a carefully knapped flint point, rests easily in his right hand, while his left carries a collection of tools that represent the difference between successful hunting and empty-handed return. Stone scrapers for processing hide, a bone needle for emergency repairs to clothing, and a small pouch containing tinder that must never be allowed to become wet. The wind carries with it the scent of distant snow and something else, something that makes Keth's nostrils flare with interest. It is the faint but unmistakable smell of animal musk, the warm, earthy scent that means life and sustenance in this world, where both are precious commodities.
He gestures for you to move more quietly, and together you creep forward through a landscape that seems carved from crystal and shadow, where every sound carries for great distances and every movement might mean the difference between feast and continued hunger. As you crest a low ridge, the source of the tracks becomes visible in the valley below. A small herd of reindeer, perhaps 15 animals in total, are pawing through the snow to reach the hardy grasses and lichens beneath. Their thick winter coats steam slightly in the cold air, and their antlers catch the early morning light like branches of polished bone. For Keth, this site represents not just potential food, but clothing, tools, and materials that will sustain his entire band for days or even weeks to come. Nothing will be wasted. The meat will be consumed fresh or dried for later use. The bones will become tools and kneels. The hide will be processed into warm clothing and shelter materials, and even the antlers will find purpose as digging implements and spear points. The hunt that follows is a study of patience and precise timing. Calf circles wide around the herd, using the natural contours of the land to remain hidden, while positioning himself between the animals and their most likely escape route. You watch as he settles into position, his body becoming as still as the frozen rocks around him, waiting for the perfect moment when wind and opportunity align.
The reindeer continue their foraging, occasionally lifting their heads to scan for danger, but their hunger drives them to continue searching for food beneath the snow. When Keithkel finally moves, it is with explosive precision. His spear flies true, striking one of the smaller animals behind the shoulder where the vital organs cluster together. The wounded reindeer staggers, then falls, while the rest of the herd bounds away across the tundra with the particular gait that allows them to traverse snow-covered ground at remarkable speed. But Keithkel's attention is already focused entirely on the fallen animal, and as you approach together, you can see the mixture of gratitude and determination in his expression. This kill represents success, but it also means hours of careful work to process the carcass and transport it back to the band. The butchering begins immediately, and you observe the methodical way Keithkel breaks down the animal. His stone knives, edges honed to razor sharpness through patient napping, slice through hide and muscle with practiced efficiency. The blood steams as it pools in the snow, creating dark patches that will soon freeze solid, and Keithkel pauses occasionally to taste it, not from primitive savagery, but from practical necessity. Fresh blood provides essential nutrients and salt that are difficult to obtain from other sources in this harsh environment, and his body's immediate craving for these elements speak to needs that run deeper than simple hunger. The liver comes free first, dark and rich with stored nutrients, and Keithkel slices off a small portion to eat immediately while it is still warm.
The taste is strong and metallic, but it carries with it the promise of strength and energy that his body desperately requires.
He offers you a piece, and though the flavor might seem overwhelming to modern palates accustomed to processed foods, there is something deeply satisfying about consuming food that represents such a direct connection between effort and reward. This is sustenance in its purest form. Life supporting life in an unbroken chain that connects every successful hunt to the survival of the community.
Yorick and Fenna work together to separate the larger muscle groups, their young strength allowing them to handle the heaviest parts of the butchering process. Elder Thon examines each organ as it is removed, determining which should be consumed immediately and which can be preserved through drying or freezing. The stomach contents, partially digested grasses and lichens, are not discarded but carefully collected. In a world where vegetable matter is scarce, these pre-processed plant materials represent valuable nutrients and fiber that the human digestive system can extract more easily than from the raw plants themselves. The practice might seem distasteful to modern sensibilities, but it represents a sophisticated understanding of nutrition and waste prevention that allowed our ancestors to extract maximum value from every kill. As the sun climbs higher in the pale sky, the butchering nears completion. The meat has been divided into portions that can be easily carried, the organs have been carefully separated according to their intended use, and the bones have been split to access the rich marrow within. This marrow, with its high fat content and creamy texture, represents one of the most calorie-dense foods available in the Ice Age diet, and you watch as Thon demonstrates the proper technique for extracting it using a thin bone tool designed specifically for this purpose. The march back to camp is slow but satisfying, each person carrying their assigned portion of the kill. The weight of the meat is substantial, but it is the good weight of security, of meals assured for the immediate future, of children who will sleep with full bellies tonight.
Conversation is minimal during the trek, partly from the physical demands of carrying heavy loads through difficult terrain, but also from a kind of reverent satisfaction that comes from successful completion of life's most essential task. Back at the camp, the real work begins. The fresh meat must be prepared for immediate consumption, while the remainder needs processing for preservation. Some will be cut into thin strips and hung over smoking fires to create jerky that can last for weeks without spoiling. Other portions will be rendered into pemmican, a concentrated mixture of dried meat, fat, and whatever berries or nuts might be available, that provides maximum nutrition in minimum volume for traveling. The bones will be cracked and boiled to extract every trace of nutrients, creating rich broths that warm the body and provide essential minerals difficult to obtain from meat alone. As the immediate excitement of the successful hunt settles into the steady rhythm of meat processing, you notice that not all members of Keth's band have returned to camp. Across the tundra, scattered like seeds on the wind, you can make out the figures of women, children, and some of the men who specialize in the quieter but equally essential art of gathering. Their movements are different from the focused intensity of the hunters, more methodical, more patient, like dancers following a choreography written in the landscape itself. Mira, a woman of middle years whose hands bear the permanent stains of plant processing, leads a small group toward a grove of stunted birch trees that have somehow found purchase in this harsh environment. Her knowledge of plants is encyclopedic, passed down through generations of women who understood that survival depended not just on the dramatic success of the hunt, but on the daily accumulation of smaller treasures hidden throughout the landscape. She moves with the confidence of someone who can read the subtle signs that indicate which plants are ready for harvest, which parts are edible, and which must be avoided at all costs. You follow her group as they approach the birch grove, noting how their eyes scan the ground with practiced intensity. Even in this seemingly barren landscape, there are treasures to be found for those who know where to look. Beneath the thin layer of snow, hardy plants continue their patient existence, some offering roots rich in starches, others providing leaves and bark that contain essential nutrients missing from an all-meat diet. The gathering of these plants requires a different kind of skill than hunting, less about explosive action and more about accumulated knowledge, pattern recognition, and the ability to find abundance in apparent scarcity. Mira kneels beside a partially buried plant whose withered above-ground portions might seem unpromising to untrained eyes, but her fingers know exactly how to follow the stem down to find the enlarged root below.
a storage organ that the plant has spent the entire growing season filling with concentrated starches and nutrients. She digs carefully with a pointed stick, her movements economical and precise to avoid damaging the precious root.
When she finally pulls it free, you can see the satisfaction in her expression. This single root, no larger than a child's fist, represents calories and nutrients that could mean the difference between health and weakness for someone in her band. The root is quickly cleaned and examined, then passed to her daughter, Senna, a girl of perhaps 14 years, who is learning the intricate art of plant identification and processing. Senna's training has been ongoing for years, starting with simple lessons about which plants are safe to touch and gradually expanding to encompass the vast catalog of knowledge necessary for successful gathering. She can identify dozens of different root vegetables, understand which parts of various plants are edible at different times of year, and knows the complex processes required to make potentially toxic plants safe for consumption. Near the base of one of the birch trees, Mira's sharp eyes detect something that causes her to move with renewed excitement. Mushrooms, their caps dusted with snow but still firm and fresh beneath, cluster around the tree's base where they've been feeding on organic matter in the soil. These fungi represent a particular treasure in the Ice Age diet. They are rich in proteins and nutrients that are difficult to obtain from other sources, and their distinctive flavors provide a welcome change from the constant diet of meat that dominates during the harsh months of winter. The harvesting of the mushrooms becomes a careful operation involving the entire gathering group.
Each mushroom must be individually examined to ensure it belongs to a safe, edible variety. A mistaken identification could lead to severe illness or death. Consequences too severe to risk in an environment where medical help consists entirely of herbal knowledge and hope. Mira demonstrates the proper techniques to her apprentices, showing them how to examine the gill structure beneath the cap, how to test the firmness of the flesh, and how to recognize the subtle signs that distinguish edible varieties from their poisonous cousins. As the mushrooms are carefully collected in woven baskets made from dried grasses, the group continues their systematic exploration of the grove. Every plant, every patch of disturbed soil, every unusual formation receives attention. Under a fallen log, they discover a cache of nuts buried by squirrels and forgotten. Each nut a concentrated package of fats and proteins that represents weeks of careful storage by the industrious rodents. The discovery of such caches is always bittersweet, as it means taking food that another creature has worked to store. But in the harsh calculus of survival, human needs must take precedence. The bark of the birch trees themselves offers sustenance to those who know how to access it. Mira demonstrates the proper technique for harvesting the inner bark, the layer just beneath the outer surface that contains concentrated sugars and nutrients. The harvesting must be done carefully. Too much removed from any single tree could kill it, eliminating a future source of food.
But thin strips can be peeled away without permanent damage, and these strips can be dried and ground into a flour-like substance that adds both calories and essential nutrients to the band's diet. While the adults focus on the larger discoveries, the children in the gathering group are learning through hands-on experience. They search for berries that might still cling to bushes, their small fingers able to reach into places that adults' hands cannot access. They learn to identify the signs of insect activity that might indicate hidden food sources, grubs and larvae that represent concentrated protein, ant colonies whose members can be harvested for their distinctive sour flavor and nutritional content, beetle larvae that burrow in fallen logs and provide fat-rich sustenance. One of the children, a boy named Kem, makes a discovery that causes considerable excitement. Beneath a pile of decaying leaves, he has found a cluster of what appear to be pale, elongated roots. Mira examines his find carefully, her experienced hands testing the texture and examining the structure of the roots. Her face lights up with recognition. These are the roots of a plant that stores significant amounts of starch, a particularly valuable find as carbohydrates are among the most difficult nutrients to obtain in sufficient quantities during the winter months. The processing of these roots begins immediately as they are most nutritious when fresh and become increasingly difficult to digest as time passes. Mira shows the group how to clean the roots properly, removing all traces of soil and examining each one for signs of rot or pest damage.
The cleaning process reveals the true treasure. Beneath the brown exterior, the flesh of the roots is white and firm, with a texture somewhere between a potato and a turnip. When Mira shaves off a small piece with her flint knife and tastes it, you can see her satisfaction. The flavor is mild but pleasant,
with a slightly sweet undertone that speaks to the concentrated starches within. Some of the roots are eaten immediately, their raw flesh providing both calories and the satisfaction of fresh, crisp texture that has been missing from the band's recent diet of preserved and cooked meats. But others are carefully wrapped in large leaves and saved for transport back to camp, where they can be processed in various ways. Some will be roasted in the coals of the fire, developing sweet, caramelized flavors as their starches convert to sugars. Others will be dried and ground into flour that could be mixed with fat and meat to create more varied and palatable meals. As the day progresses and the gathering expedition continues, you begin to understand the incredible depth of knowledge required for successful plant collection. Every season brings different opportunities, and successful gatherers must maintain a mental catalog of hundreds of different plants, their growing patterns, optimal harvesting times, and processing requirements. They must understand which plants are safe in small quantities, but dangerous in large amounts, which require special preparation to neutralize toxins, and which provide the best nutrition at different times of their growth cycles. The landscape that seemed so barren from a distance reveals its hidden abundance to trained eyes.
Wild onions, their green shoots barely visible above the snow, provide sharp, pungent flavors that help make preserved meat more palatable, while also contributing nutrients that prevent disease. Wild garlic, growing in scattered patches wherever conditions allow, offers similar benefits, along with natural compounds that help preserve other foods and support immune system function. Even the needles of coniferous trees provide vitamin C and other essential nutrients when properly prepared, though their resinous flavor requires careful blending with other foods. As afternoon shadows begin to lengthen, the gathering party begins the trek back toward camp, their baskets and carrying sacks filled with the day's discoveries. The weight they carry is different from that borne by the hunting party, less dramatic but no less essential, representing the accumulated wealth of patience, knowledge, and careful observation. Their harvest will supplement the meat from the morning's hunt, providing essential nutrients and flavors that transform simple survival into something approaching balanced nutrition. The return journey provides an opportunity to process some of their discoveries on the move. Nuts are cracked open and their meat extracted, bark is sorted and prepared for drying, and roots are cleaned and examined for the best ways to preserve them. Each step in the processing represents generations of accumulated wisdom, techniques passed down through countless seasons of trial and error until they became refined into the most efficient methods for extracting maximum nutrition from every plant resource. Back at camp, the integration of gathered plants with hunted meat begins immediately.
The evening meal becomes a complex orchestration of flavors and nutrients, as plant foods are combined with animal products to create dishes that provide more complete nutrition than either component could offer alone. Root are roasted alongside strips of venison, their starches complementing the proteins and fats of the meat. Wild onions and garlic are used to flavor broths made from boiled bones, adding taste complexity while contributing their own nutritional benefits. The processing and preparation of plant foods reveals sophisticated understanding of food science, principles that wouldn't be formally recognized until thousands of years later. Toxic compounds in certain plants are neutralized through careful preparation, some through cooking, others through fermentation processes that break down harmful substances while preserving or even enhancing nutritional content. Nuts and seeds are often processed in ways that improve their digestibility, crushing or grinding them to break down tough cell walls and release nutrients that would otherwise pass through the human digestive system unused. As the evening fire crackles and the day's bounty is distributed among the band members, you can observe the complex social dynamics that surround food sharing in this ancient community. The successful hunters receive recognition for the skill and courage, but the gatherers are equally honored for their patient accumulation of essential nutrients. Children watch and learn as adults demonstrate proper techniques for processing and preparing different types of foods, absorbing knowledge that will prove essential for their own survival as they mature. The meal that finally emerges from this day of hunting and gathering represents far more than simple sustenance.
It is the product of countless generations of accumulated knowledge, refined techniques, and cooperative effort. Every bite contains not just calories and nutrients, but the wisdom of ancestors who learned through experimentation and observation how to extract life from a landscape that seemed determined to withhold it. The flavors may seem strange to modern palates, but they represent humanity's first steps toward the complex cuisines that would eventually develop as our species spread across the globe. The abundance of today's successful hunt and gathering expedition cannot last forever, and as you settle into the rhythm of life with Keth's band,
You begin to understand the cyclical nature of feast and famine that governs existence in this frozen world. Winter deepens with each passing day, and the signs of approaching scarcity become increasingly difficult to ignore. The wind carries a sharper edge that cuts through even the thickest clothing. Snow falls more frequently and lies deeper on the ground, and the game trails that were once well-traveled highways for migrating animals grow silent and empty. 3 weeks have passed since the successful reindeer hunt, and the preserved meat that seemed so abundant when first processed has dwindled to carefully rationed portions. Each meal is calculated with mathematical precision, enough to maintain strength for essential tasks, but not so much that reserves are depleted before the next opportunity for replenishment. You watch as Elder Thane weighs each piece of dried meat before distribution, his weathered hands steady despite the gravity of his responsibility. A mistaken calculation could mean the difference between survival and starvation for the entire band.
The psychological weight of scarcity affects every member of the group differently. The children, whose metabolisms demand constant fuel for growth and development, become increasingly listless as their bodies adapt to reduced caloric intake. Their usual laughter and play diminish, replaced by a quiet conservatism of energy that speaks to instincts deeper than conscious thought. Jorik and Fenna, the young adults whose strength is essential for hunting and heavy labor, maintain their physical activities, but you can see the gradual changes in their faces as fat reserves disappear and their bodies begin the slow process of consuming their own muscle tissue for fuel. Keth himself becomes more focused and intense as the days pass, his every waking moment consumed with the search for opportunities to replenish the band's dwindling supplies. His morning scouts range farther from camp, following increasingly faint traces of animal activity across landscapes that seem utterly devoid of life. His tracking skills, honed through decades of experience, allow him to read stories in the snow that would be invisible to untrained eyes. The faint depression that might indicate a ptarmigan's resting place, the subtle displacement of snow that could mark where a hare passed days earlier, the almost imperceptible scent traces that might lead to a den where hibernating animals wait out the worst of winter. The gathering activities that supplemented the hunting during more abundant times become increasingly desperate expeditions into a landscape that offers fewer and fewer resources.
Mira leads her group on longer and more dangerous journeys, traveling to exposed hillsides where wind has blown away some of the snow to reveal buried vegetation. The plants they find are stunted and sparse, their nutritional content reduced by the harsh conditions. But every root, every preserved berry, every piece of edible bark represents calories that could extend survival for another day or week. The processing of these marginal food sources requires techniques that push the boundaries of what might normally be considered edible. Bones that have already been boiled for broth are cracked open again and ground into powder that can be mixed with any available plant matter to create a paste that provides essential minerals and calcium. Hide scraps that might normally be used for clothing or tools are instead cut into small pieces and boiled extensively until they break down into a gelatinous substance that provides protein and some calories, though the taste is challenging even by the standards of survival cuisine. Tree bark becomes an increasingly important component of the diet as other resources dwindle. The inner bark of birches, pines, and other trees contains sugars and cellulose that can provide some nutritional value when properly processed. Mara demonstrates the painstaking technique of harvesting bark strips, scraping away the bitter outer layers to reach the more palatable inner tissue, then grinding this into a fibrous powder that can be mixed with what little fat remains from previous hunts.
The resulting mixture has the texture of wet sawdust and a flavor that ranges from bland to actively unpleasant, but it provides bulk and some calories that help quiet the constant gnawing of hunger. The social dynamics of the band shift subtly but significantly as scarcity deepens. Food sharing, which during abundant times follows established patterns of generosity and reciprocity, becomes a more complex negotiation involving careful assessment of individual needs, future hunting capabilities, and the delicate balance between individual survival and group cohesion. Children and pregnant or nursing women receive priority access to the most nutritious foods available,
but even these allocations are smaller than optimal. Elder Than, whose deep knowledge makes him invaluable to the group's survival, receives respect through continued inclusion in meals, but you can see him quietly reducing his own portions to ensure more remains for younger members who will bear the responsibility of future hunting and gathering. As hunger becomes a constant companion, the band develops strategies for managing both the physical and psychological challenges of reduced nutrition. Meals become more elaborate affairs despite their smaller size, with careful attention paid to presentation and the social rituals surrounding food consumption. Even the simplest broth made from previously used bones is served with ceremony, each person receiving their portion with gratitude and consuming it slowly to maximize both the physical satisfaction and the social bonding that eating together provides. The search for alternative protein sources becomes increasingly creative and desperate. Insect larvae that might normally be ignored become treasured discoveries, their fat content and protein density making them valuable additions to the limited diet.
Ant colonies discovered beneath fallen logs yield small harvests of protein-rich insects, whose sharp, acidic flavor adds variety to the monotonous routine of preserved meat and plant matter. Even earthworms, found in the few areas where soil remains unfrozen, are collected and roasted until their texture becomes more palatable, providing protein and nutrients that could mean the difference between continued strength and dangerous weakness. The hunting strategies employed during these lean times require different approaches than the relatively straightforward pursuit of large game during more abundant seasons. Keth and his fellow hunters focus on smaller, less obvious prey, the ptarmigan that change color with the seasons and can be nearly invisible against snow-covered backgrounds, the Arctic hares whose speed and agility make them challenging targets, but whose meat provides essential variety in the band's protein sources, the occasional fish that might be caught through holes cut in frozen streams where flowing water prevents complete ice formation. Trapping becomes increasingly important as active hunting yields diminishing returns. The construction and maintenance of snares requires precious materials, sinew for cordage, carved wood for triggers, stones for weights. But successful traps can capture animals with no expenditure of human energy, allowing hunters to cover larger areas and increase their chances of success. The placement of traps requires intimate knowledge of animal behavior patterns, understanding which routes creatures might use when traveling between feeding areas and shelter, and the patience to leave traps in place for days or weeks before checking their success.
The psychological stress of chronic hunger affects not just individual behavior, but the entire social fabric of the band. Tempers become shorter as blood sugar levels remain consistently low, and conflicts that might normally be resolved through discussion and compromise require more careful mediation to prevent them from escalating into dangerous confrontations. Sleep becomes less restful as empty stomachs make comfortable rest more difficult, leading to increased irritability and reduced decision-making capability during the crucial daylight hours when hunting and gathering opportunities might present themselves. Yet, within this framework of scarcity and stress, you also observe remarkable examples of human resilience and adaptation. The band members develop heightened sensitivity to any potential food sources, their senses becoming more acute as their bodies respond to the constant pressure of inadequate nutrition. Their movements become more economical, eliminating unnecessary expenditure of energy while maintaining the strength needed for essential survival tasks. Their cooperation deepens as individual survival becomes increasingly dependent on group success, creating bonds of mutual support that transcend normal social relationships. The preparation and consumption of meals during these lean times becomes invested with almost ritual significance. Every piece of food is examined carefully before consumption, not just for safety, but as a form of gratitude for whatever nourishment it might provide.
Cooking methods are adjusted to extract maximum nutrition from minimal ingredients. Bones are boiled repeatedly until they crumble. Plant materials are processed through multiple stages to break down tough fibers and release every available calorie. And even cooking fires are managed carefully to ensure that fuel is not wasted on excessive heat that provides no additional nutritional benefit. As you witness the daily struggle for survival during these lean times, you begin to understand how the constant pressure of potential starvation shaped not just the immediate behavior of Ice Age peoples, but their entire worldview and social structure. The knowledge of which foods could sustain life during the hardest times became some of the most precious information that could be passed from one generation to the next. The social bonds formed through sharing scarce resources created networks of mutual obligation and support that could mean the difference between individual death and community survival. The techniques developed for fighting and processing marginal foods during periods of scarcity represented innovations that expanded the range of resources available to human communities, allowing them to survive in environments that might otherwise have proven uninhabitable. The patience required to maintain hope and continue searching for food during long periods without success built mental resilience that served these communities in all aspects of their difficult lives. And the cooperation necessary to share limited resources fairly created social structures that would eventually evolve into the complex societies that followed in later periods of human history.
Through the long, hungry weeks of deep winter, Casbad demonstrates that survival is not just about individual strength or skill, but about the accumulated wisdom of communities working together to overcome challenges that would overwhelm any single person. Their methods for finding, processing, and sharing food during the leanest times represents humanity's first steps toward the agricultural innovations and social organizations that would eventually allow our species to thrive in every environment on Earth. Every carefully rationed meal, every shared discovery of hidden food sources, every act of mutual support during the hardest times builds toward a future where hunger would become increasingly rare and cooperation increasingly sophisticated. As winter finally begins to loosen its grip on the land and the first tentative signs of spring appear in the slowly lengthening days, you find yourself transported to a different landscape and a different time, following a remarkable woman named Asha, whose life has become inextricably intertwined with the greatest creatures of the Ice Age. She stands on a windswept plateau, her weathered face torn toward the horizon, where a massive herd of woolly mammoths moves like a living mountain range across the tundra. Her people, the Karak Band, have been following these giants for 3 generations, learning their patterns, understanding their needs, and building an entire way of life around the rhythms of their seasonal migrations. The relationship between Asha's people and the mammoth herds represents one of humanity's earliest experiments in what might almost be called domestication, though the mammoths remain entirely wild and free.
Unlike the opportunistic hunting practiced by Ket's band, the Karak have developed sophisticated strategies for living alongside the herds without disrupting their natural behaviors. They have learned to read the subtle signs that indicate when a herd is preparing to move, understanding the complex social dynamics that govern mammoth society, and developing hunting techniques that remove only the weakest or oldest animals without threatening the overall health of the population. Asha herself embodies 3 decades of accumulated knowledge about these magnificent creatures. Her grandmother was among the first to recognize that mammoth herds followed predictable routes between seasonal feeding grounds, traveling ancient pathways that had been carved into the landscape over thousands of years. Her mother refined these observations into practical strategies for predicting herd movements, identifying optimal hunting opportunities, and processing the enormous quantities of meat, hide, and bone that a single mammoth could provide. Now Asha carries this knowledge forward, adding her own innovations and observations to a growing body of expertise that allows her people to thrive in ways that other bands can barely imagine. The scale of resources provided by a single mammoth is almost beyond comprehension. An adult bull can weigh as much as 8 tons, providing meat that could feed a band of 30 people for months if properly preserved. The hide, thick and covered with dense wool, can be processed into clothing and shelter materials that offer protection against even the harshest weather conditions.
The bones, massive and incredibly strong, become the framework for semi-permanent structures that allow the band to establish seasonal camps that are more substantial and comfortable than the temporary shelters used by most Ice Age peoples. Even the tusks, curved ivory spirals that can reach 12 feet in length, provide material for tools, weapons, and trade goods that are prized throughout the region. But accessing these resources requires patience, skill, and careful planning that goes far beyond the opportunistic hunting strategies employed for smaller game. Asha has spent years learning to read the complex social structure of mammoth herds, understanding which animals are likely to become separated from the group, recognizing the signs of illness or injury that might make an individual vulnerable to hunters, and identifying the moments when environmental conditions create opportunities for successful attacks without endangering the human hunters involved. The hunting strategies employed against mammoths require cooperation on a scale rarely seen in other aspects of Ice Age life. A successful mammoth hunt might involve 40 or 50 people working in coordinated teams, each with specialized roles and responsibilities. Some hunters are responsible for driving the targeted animal away from the protection of the herd, using fire and noise to create confusion and panic. Others wait in concealed positions along escape routes, ready to launch spears or arrows when the mammoth passes within range. Still others serve as support teams, ready to provide assistance if hunters are injured or to help with the immediate processing of the carcass if the hunt is successful.
Asha's role in these hunts is that of coordinator and strategist, her deep knowledge of mammoth behavior allowing her to predict how the animals will respond to different hunting pressures. She can determine which direction a frightened mammoth is likely to run, understand how weather conditions will affect the animal's senses and mobility, and recognize the critical moments when a coordinated attack has the highest probability of success. Her decisions during the hunt can mean the difference between feast and catastrophe, as an unsuccessful attack on such a dangerous animal can result in serious injuries or deaths among the hunting party. The processing of a mammoth carcass represents one of the most complex logistical challenges faced by Ice Age peoples. The sheer quantity of meat involved requires immediate and systematic butchering to prevent spoilage, with different teams responsible for different aspects of the processing. The hide must be removed carefully to preserve its integrity for later use, requiring skilled flensers who understand the anatomy of these massive creatures. The meat must be divided into portions appropriate for different preservation methods, some for immediate consumption, some for drying into jerky, some for rendering into fat that will provide essential calories during leaner times. The bones present particular challenges and opportunities. The massive leg bones, when cracked open, contain quantities of marrow that represent concentrated nutrition beyond anything available from smaller animals. But accessing this marrow requires specialized tools and techniques, as the bones are too large and strong to be broken with conventional methods.
Asha's people have developed sophisticated bone-cracking techniques using heavy stone hammers and carefully placed strikes that can split even the largest bones without destroying the precious marrow within. The social implications of a successful mammoth hunt extend far beyond the immediate provision of food and materials. Such hunts require coordination between multiple family groups, creating networks of cooperation and mutual obligation that bind different bands together in complex relationships of reciprocity and support. The meat from a single mammoth is far too much for any single band to consume before spoilage, necessitating sharing arrangements that create bonds between groups and ensure that all participants benefit from the success of the hunt. These sharing networks also serve as insurance systems that help individual bands survive during periods when their own hunting efforts are unsuccessful. A band that contributes hunting expertise to a mammoth hunt led by another group can expect to receive assistance when they themselves face shortages or difficulties. Over time, these reciprocal relationships create larger social structures that allow groups of several hundred people to coordinate their activities across vast territories, sharing information about herd movements, environmental conditions, and hunting opportunities. The knowledge required for successful mammoth hunting extends far beyond simple hunting techniques to encompass detailed understanding of animal psychology, herd dynamics, seasonal migration patterns, and environmental factors that influence mammoth behavior. Asha has learned to recognize the subtle signs that indicate when a herd is preparing to move to new feeding grounds, changes in the animal's grazing patterns, increased restlessness among the younger animals, the complex vocalizations that mammoths use to communicate across long distances.
This knowledge allows her people to anticipate herd movements and position themselves advantageously for hunting opportunities. The seasonal cycle of mammoth migration creates a rhythm of abundance and scarcity that shapes every aspect of life for the Karak band. During the peak migration periods, when herds are moving through their territory in large numbers, the opportunities for successful hunts are numerous, and the band enjoys a level of prosperity that allows them to engage in activities beyond mere survival. Surplus meat can be traded with other bands for goods that are not available locally. High-quality stone for tool-making, shells and amber for decoration, or specialized tools crafted by expert artisans in distant regions. But the migration patterns also create periods of relative scarcity,
when the herds have moved to distant feeding grounds and hunting opportunities are limited. During these times, the band must rely on preserved foods and alternative protein sources, much like other Ice Age peoples during difficult periods. However, their access to mammoth resources during abundant times allows them to build up reserves that make these lean periods less desperate than they might otherwise be. The preservation techniques employed for mammoth meat require adaptations of standard food processing methods to handle the enormous quantities involved. Strips of meat for drying must be cut to specific thicknesses to ensure proper preservation without excessive moisture retention that could lead to spoilage. The rendering of fat requires careful temperature control and timing to extract maximum nutrition while creating products that will remain stable during long-term storage.
Even the preparation of pemmican becomes a major undertaking when the base ingredient is mammoth meat, requiring coordination between multiple specialists to ensure that the final product meets the highest standards for nutrition and preservation. The clothing and shelter materials derived from mammoth hide require specialized processing techniques that differ significantly from those used for smaller animals. The thickness and density of mammoth hide make it excellent for protection against cold and wind, but also more difficult to work with using traditional stone tools. Asha's people have developed specialized scrapers and knives designed specifically for processing mammoth hide, along with techniques for softening and preparing the material that take advantage of its unique properties. The semi-permanent structures that can be built using mammoth bones represent a significant advancement in Ice Age architecture and comfort. The massive bones provide structural elements that are strong enough to support substantial roofs and walls, creating shelters that are more spacious and weatherproof than anything that can be constructed using only wood and small animal bones. These bone houses allow the band to establish seasonal camps that serve as bases for extended hunting expeditions, providing secure storage for preserved foods and supplies, while offering protection against the worst weather conditions. As you observe Asha leading her people through another migration cycle, following the mammoth herds across vast expanses of tundra and steppe, you begin to understand how this specialized way of life represents a crucial step in human cultural evolution.
The cooperative strategies required for mammoth hunting create social bonds and organizational structures that are more complex than those seen in most other Ice Age communities. The abundance provided by successful hunts allows for specialization of labor, with some individuals focusing on hunting while others develop expertise in food processing, hide preparation, tool making, or other essential skills. The knowledge systems developed for tracking and understanding mammoth behavior represent sophisticated forms of scientific observation and analysis, with information carefully recorded and passed down through generations of specialists. The seasonal rhythms imposed by mammoth migration patterns create temporal frameworks that organize social activities, trade relationships, and cultural practices around predictable cycles of abundance and scarcity. And the preservation techniques necessary for managing mammoth-scale resources drive innovations in food processing and storage that expand the possibilities for long-term planning and community development. Through Asha's eyes, you see how the relationship between humans and mammoths becomes a partnership of sorts, with human hunters learning to work within the natural patterns of mammoth society rather than disrupting them. The success of this approach allows both species to thrive in the challenging environment of the Ice Age, creating a model for sustainable resource management that would influence human-animal relationships for thousands of years to come. As spring advances and the mammoth herds settle into their calving grounds, you witness Asha at work on what will become her greatest contribution to her people's survival: the development of revolutionary food preservation techniques that can handle the massive quantities of meat provided by mammoth hunting.
Her innovations go far beyond the simple jerky making and fat rendering employed by other bands, encompassing sophisticated methods that can preserve hundreds of pounds of meat for months or even years without spoilage, creating food security that allows her people to plan and organize their lives in ways that would be impossible for groups dependent on day-to-day hunting and gathering. The challenge that drives Asha's innovations is fundamentally different from that faced by hunters of smaller game. When Kenneth's band successfully kills a reindeer, they can process and consume the entire animal within a few days, with preservation needs limited to perhaps 20 or 30 pounds of meat that can be dried using traditional methods. But a mammoth provides thousands of pounds of meat that must be processed quickly before decomposition begins, requiring preservation techniques that can handle industrial-scale quantities while maintaining nutritional quality and safety over extended periods.
Asha's first major innovation involves the construction of specialized drying structures that can handle the volume and weight of mammoth meat strips. Traditional jerky making relies on simple wooden frames or natural rock formations to support thin strips of meat during the drying process. But mammoth meat strips, even when cut to optimal thickness, are too heavy and numerous for such simple solutions. Asha has designed elaborate scaffolding systems using mammoth bones as structural elements, creating multi-level drying towers that can accommodate hundreds of meat strips while ensuring adequate air circulation for proper preservation. These bone and hide drying towers represent sophisticated engineering solutions to complex logistical problems.
The massive leg bones of mammoths provide vertical supports that can bear enormous weight, while smaller bones are lashed together to create horizontal supports for the meat strips. Hide panels are arranged to provide protection from rain and excessive moisture, while allowing controlled air circulation that promotes even drying. The structures can be partially disassembled for transport during migrations, with the most essential components carried along, while more easily replaced elements are left behind for reconstruction at the next seasonal camp. The preparation of meat for drying in these quantities requires systematic approaches that go far beyond the intuitive methods used for smaller amounts. Asha has developed precise cutting techniques that ensure uniform thickness across hundreds of meat strips. Understanding that variations in thickness can lead to uneven drying and potential spoilage in some pieces, while others become over-dried and lose nutritional value. Her cutting methods take into account the grain and fiber structure of mammoth muscle tissue, which differs significantly from that of smaller animals and requires different approaches to achieve optimal results. The timing and environmental conditions for large-scale meat drying become critical factors that Asha has learned to manage through careful observation and experimentation. The massive quantities involved mean that the drying process cannot be completed in a single day or even a single week, requiring sustained favorable conditions for successful preservation. Asha has developed methods for predicting weather patterns based on wind direction, cloud formations, and animal behavior, allowing her to time mammoth hunts for periods when extended good drying weather is most likely.
When weather conditions threaten the drying process, Asha employs backup preservation methods that can salvage meat that might otherwise spoil. Smoking techniques using specially constructed fire pits and smoke chambers can accelerate the preservation process during periods of high humidity or unexpected rain. Salt, when available from natural deposits or trade with coastal peoples, can be applied to meat strips to draw out moisture and inhibit bacterial growth even under less than ideal conditions. Emergency processing methods can convert partially dried meat into other preserved forms that are more resistant to spoilage. The rendering of mammoth fat presents particular challenges and opportunities that require specialized techniques and equipment. The quantities involved, a single mammoth can provide several hundred pounds of fat, require processing methods that can handle large volumes while maintaining quality and preventing rancidity. Asha has developed large-scale rendering systems using mammoth skull bones as natural cauldrons, their bowl-like shape and thick walls making them ideal for containing the large quantities of fat and maintaining the controlled temperatures necessary for proper rendering. The rendered fat serves multiple purposes beyond simple nutrition, becoming a versatile resource that supports many aspects of band life. High-quality rendered fat can be mixed with dried meat and plant materials to create massive quantities of pemmican, providing concentrated nutrition that can sustain the entire band during long migrations or extended periods without successful hunting. Lower grades of rendered fat serve as fuel from lamps and torches, providing light and heat during the long winter months when other fuel sources are scarce.
That is also essential for treating and waterproofing hide materials, maintaining the flexibility and weather resistance of clothing and shelter materials. Asha's innovations in fat rendering include temperature control methods that ensure optimal quality while preventing the degradation that can occur with overheating. She has learned to recognize the subtle signs that indicate when fat has reached the proper temperature for rendering. The sound of bubbling changes, the color shifts from opaque to translucent, and the aroma develops the characteristic rich smell of properly rendered fat. Timing is critical, as fat that is rendered too quickly or at too high a temperature develops off flavors and reduced nutritional value, while fat that is processed too slowly may not achieve the stability necessary for long-term storage. The storage of preserved mammoth products requires infrastructure that goes beyond anything needed by bands dependent on smaller game. Properly dried mammoth jerky, when protected from moisture and pests, can remain edible for years, but the quantities involved require dedicated storage facilities that can protect hundreds of pounds of preserved food. Asha's people construct elaborate cache systems using mammoth bones as frameworks. creating raised storage platforms that protect preserved foods from ground moisture while providing access for regular inspection and rotation of supplies. These storage systems incorporate sophisticated pest management techniques that prevent insects and rodents from destroying preserved foods. Natural insect repellents derived from certain plants are woven into storage containers, while the design of the cache structures includes barriers that make it difficult for rodents to access stored food.
The positioning of storage areas takes advantage of natural wind patterns that help keep flying insects away from preserved foods, while elevated platforms reduce access for ground-dwelling pests. The social organization required to manage these large-scale preservation operations represents a significant evolution in Ice Age community structure. Unlike the family-based work groups that handle preservation of smaller game, mammoth processing requires coordination of dozens of people working in specialized teams over extended periods. ASH has developed management systems that assign specific responsibilities to different individuals and groups, ensuring that all aspects of the preservation process receive adequate attention while preventing conflicts over resource allocation and work assignments. The environmental impact of mammoth-scale preservation operations requires careful management to ensure sustainability of the resource base. ASH has developed protocols that limit the number of mammoths hunted during any given season, ensuring that herd populations remain stable and productive over the long term. The intensive processing operations also require substantial quantities of fuel for drying fires and rendering operations, necessitating careful management of wood and other combustible resources to prevent local depletion. Innovation in preservation techniques continues as ASHA experiments with new methods and refines existing ones based on accumulated experience. Recent developments include fermentation techniques that can preserve certain types of mammoth products without requiring extensive drying, creating foods with different flavors and nutritional profiles that add variety to the band's diet. Combination preservation methods that use multiple techniques simultaneously can create products with enhanced stability and improved taste, representing continuing evolution in food preservation science.
As you observe ASHA coordinating another massive preservation operation following a successful mammoth hunt, you begin to understand how her innovations represent a fundamental shift in human relationship with food resources. The ability to preserve food on this scale creates opportunities for population growth, territorial expansion, and cultural development that were previously impossible. The technique she has developed will be passed down through generations, refined and adapted by future innovators, eventually evolving into the sophisticated food preservation methods that allow modern societies to maintain complex supply chains and support large populations in environments that could not sustain them through hunting and gathering alone. The morning that changes everything for ASHA's people begins like countless others, with scouts returning from their routine survey of the mammoth herd's feeding grounds. But instead of the familiar reports of herd movements and animal conditions, they bring news that seems impossible to comprehend. The mammoths are gone. Not moved to different feeding areas, not temporarily scattered by predators or weather, but completely absent from territories where they have grazed for generations. The vast spaces that should be dotted with the familiar shapes of these massive creatures stretch empty to the horizon, showing only wind-bent grass and the gradually fading signs of their recent presence. ASHA stands at the edge of the plateau where she has observed mammoth herds for 30 years, her experienced eyes scanning the landscape for any sign that might explain this unprecedented disappearance. The feeding grounds below still show the characteristic disturbances left by mammoth activity, areas where the grass has been cropped short, wallows where the animals rolled in mud to protect themselves from insects, and scattered patches of dung that mark their recent presence, but the creatures themselves have vanished as completely as if they had never existed, leaving behind only the infrastructure of a way of life that suddenly seems as obsolete as last year's snow. The immediate implications of the mammoth's disappearance create a crisis that goes far beyond simple food shortage. ASHA's people have spent generations developing specialized skills, tools, and social structures organized entirely around mammoth hunting and processing. Their preservation facilities are designed for mammoth-scale operations and prove inadequate for the smaller quantities of meat that other hunting methods might provide. Their weapons and hunting strategies have been optimized for creatures weighing several tons and are poorly suited for pursuing the smaller, faster animals that might serve as alternative prey. Even their seasonal migration patterns have been synchronized with mammoth movements, leaving them in locations that may be far from optimal hunting grounds for other species. The psychological impact of losing their fundamental food source affects every member of the band differently, but uniformly devastatingly.
The older members, whose entire lives have been organized around mammoth hunting, struggle to envision how survival might be possible without the creatures that have defined their existence. Elder Coram, whose knowledge of mammoth behavior was legendary, becomes increasingly withdrawn as he grapples with the realization that his specialized expertise has suddenly become worthless.
His detailed understanding of mammoth social structures, migration patterns, and hunting vulnerabilities represents decades of accumulated wisdom that no longer has any practical application. For the younger members of the band, the challenge is different but equally severe. They had been trained from childhood in the specific skills required for mammoth hunting, learning to read the subtle signs of mammoth behavior, to coordinate complex multi-person hunting strategies, and to process enormous quantities of meat using specialized techniques. These skills, which represented their path to adult status and responsibility within the band, suddenly seem irrelevant to survival in a world without mammoths. The apprenticeships and training programs that gave structure and meaning to their development have lost their purpose, leaving them adrift without clear paths forward. Asha herself faces the most complex challenge of all: how to lead her people through a transformation that she herself cannot fully envision. Her innovations in preservation and processing have made her band one of the most successful and prosperous groups in the region, but these innovations are specifically adapted to mammoth resources and may prove counterproductive when applied to other food sources. The search for the missing herds becomes an obsession that consumes enormous resources and energy over the following weeks. Scouting parties range farther and farther from traditional mammoth territories, following increasingly faint traces and pursuing rumors of mammoth sightings that prove to be false hopes or misidentified other animals.
The emotional investment in finding the herds prevents rational acceptance of their disappearance, leading to increasingly desperate expeditions that waste precious time and energy that should be directed toward developing alternative survival strategies. As the reality of the mammoth's permanent absence gradually becomes undeniable, Asha begins the painful process of deconstructing a way of life and rebuilding from whatever elements can be salvaged. The massive bone and hide drying towers that represent her greatest innovations are dismantled, their components repurposed for smaller-scale food processing operations. The elaborate cache systems designed for storing mammoth-scale preserved foods are adapted for the more modest qualities that other preservation methods might produce. Even the social organization of the band must be restructured, as the large work teams required for mammoth processing give way to smaller, more flexible groups that can pursue diverse survival strategies simultaneously. The transition to hunting smaller animals requires not just different techniques, but entirely different mindsets and social structures. The patient, long-term planning that mammoth hunting demanded must give way to more opportunistic approaches that can respond quickly to changing conditions and transient opportunities. The specialized roles that band members filled in mammoth operations become less relevant than general competence across a wide range of survival skills. The elaborate cooperation protocols that coordinated dozens of people in mammoth hunts are replaced by simpler, more flexible arrangements that allow small groups to pursue different strategies simultaneously. Asha's leadership during this transition demonstrates a remarkable adaptability and wisdom as she guides her people to the process of cultural transformation. Rather than clinging to obsolete methods or attempting to force mammoth hunting techniques into inappropriate applications, she embraces experimentation and innovation, encouraging band members to develop new skills and explore alternative approaches to survival. Her preservation innovations, while originally designed for mammoth processing, provide foundational knowledge that can be adapted to other applications, creating bridges between the old way of life and whatever new approaches might emerge. The retraining of band members for non-mammoth hunting becomes a complex educational challenge that requires careful balance between preserving valuable skills and developing new capabilities. Some aspects of mammoth hunting translate well to other large game. The coordination required for hunting bison or auroch draws on similar principles, though the specific techniques must be modified for creatures that are smaller but potentially more dangerous than mammoths. Other skills prove completely non-transferable, requiring wholesale development of new expertise in areas such as small game hunting, intensive plant gathering, and fishing techniques that were previously unnecessary. The psychological adaptation to a more uncertain and less abundant lifestyle proves as challenging as the practical adjustments. Band members who regrew accustomed to the food security provided by mammoth preservation must learn to live with the anxiety of day-to-day uncertainty about where their next meal will come from. The confidence that came from mastering a sophisticated but predictable survival system gives way to the stress of constantly learning the skills and adapting to changing conditions.
The social status systems that were based on mammoth hunting expertise must be rebuilt around different criteria for success and contribution to band welfare. Resource allocation during the transition period requires careful management of dwindling preserved mammoth products while simultaneously investing in the development of alternative food sources. The massive stores of preserved mammoth meat that once represented security now become a finite resource that must be rationed carefully to provide time for developing other survival strategies. Too rapid consumption leaves the band vulnerable to starvation if alternative methods prove unsuccessful, while excessive conservation may waste valuable nutrition during the critical period when energy is needed for intensive learning and adaptation efforts. Trade relationships with other bands become critically important as Asha's people seek to exchange their remaining mammoth-derived goods for knowledge, skills, and resources that can support their transition to alternative survival strategies. Other groups that never specialized in mammoth hunting possess expertise in small game hunting, intensive plant gathering, and seasonal resource management that could prove essential for survival. The preserved mammoth products that once commanded high prices in trade relationships now become invaluable currency for purchasing the knowledge and assistance needed for cultural transformation. The development of new food procurement strategies requires systematic experimentation with techniques that were previously unnecessary or ignored. Small game hunting demands different weapons, different coordination strategies, and different processing methods than mammoth hunting. Intensive plant gathering requires detailed knowledge of seasonal plant cycles, processing techniques for plants that were previously unimportant, and preservation methods adopted to smaller quantities and different nutritional profiles. Fishing techniques, if accessible water sources are available, represent completely new skills that must be learned from scratch or acquired through trade relationships with other groups. Innovation in food processing becomes essential as traditional mammoth-scale preservation techniques prove inadequate for smaller quantities and different types of food sources. New drying methods must be developed for smaller meat portions that require different treatment than mammoth meat strips. Preservation techniques for plant foods become more important, as these resources play larger roles in the band's diet. Storage systems must be redesigned for more diverse types of preserved foods that have different requirements for protection from moisture, pests, and spoilage. Through Asha's leadership during this crisis, you witness one of humanity's earliest examples of successful adaptation to environmental change, demonstrating the flexibility and innovation that would eventually allow our species to survive and thrive through countless challenges and transformations. The pain of losing their specialized way of life is real and profound, but the ability to rebuild and adapt creates new possibilities that might never have been explored if the comfortable abundance of mammoth hunting had continued indefinitely. In learning to survive without the creatures that had defined their existence, Asha's people discover strengths and capabilities they never knew they possessed, setting the stage for continued evolution and development of human survival strategies. Deep within the limestone heart of what will one day become the Dordogne region of France, you find yourself standing before paintings that shimmer in the flickering light of animal fat lamps. Their ochre and charcoal pigments still vivid after thousands of years.
But these are not the famous cave paintings that future archaeologists will discover and catalog. These are images of food, of consumption, of the sacred relationship between human hunger and the abundance of the natural world. The cave, known to its creators as the place of echoing hunger, serves as both art gallery and temple, where the consumption of food becomes transformed into something approaching the divine. The artist responsible for these extraordinary images is called Yurak, a man whose thin frame and permanently stained fingers mark him as one who observes rather than hunts, who captures rather than kills. His role within his band represents a remarkable innovation in human social organization, the emergence of individuals whose primary contribution to community survival comes not through direct food procurement, but through the creation of images and ceremonies that bind the group together around shared understanding of their relationship with the food sources that sustain them. Yurak moves through the cave chambers with the confidence of someone who has spent years perfecting his understanding of how firelight interacts with rock surfaces, how pigments behave on different types of stone, and how images can be positioned to create maximum psychological impact on viewers. His paintings are not simple representations of animals, but complex narratives that capture the entire cycle of food procurement, from the patient observation of prey through the dramatic moments of the kill to the communal processing and consumption that follows. On the cave wall before you, a magnificent auroch emerges from the stone as if the rock itself has given birth to the creature. But this is not merely an animal portrait. Surrounding the auroch are smaller human figures engaged in various aspects of food processing. Some kneel beside fires where meat strips hang drying in the smoke, their positions and gestures captured with such precision that you can almost smell the rich aroma of preservation in progress. Others work at breaking down the carcass, their stone tools rendered in careful detail that speaks to deep understanding of the butchering process. The positioning of these images within the cave follows principles that Yurok has developed through years of experimentation with how firelight affects perception and emotional response. The auroch dominates a natural alcove where the curvature of the walls creates acoustic properties that amplify sound, allowing the cave to transform human voices into something that seems to emerge from the painted animals themselves. During ceremonial feasts, when band members gather to consume specially prepared foods, their chants and songs echo from the stone in ways that make the painted creatures seem alive and present. But the paintings also serve deeper psychological and spiritual functions that transform simple food consumption into sacred activity. Before major hunts, band members gather in the cave to perform rituals that invoke the cooperation of the painted animals, asking for their consent to be hunted and promising that their sacrifice will be honored through proper use of every part of their bodies. The consumption of specially prepared foods during these ceremonies creates psychological states that participants experience as communication with the spirit world, building confidence and determination that improve hunting success.
The preparation of foods for these ceremonial occasions requires techniques and ingredients that go far beyond simple nutrition. Yurok has developed recipes that combine rare and precious ingredients to create dishes that taste unlike anything consumed during ordinary meals. Wild honey, when available from bee colonies discovered during gathering expeditions, is mixed with rendered fat and pulverized nuts to create concentrated sweet preparations that provide intense energy while producing mild euphoric effects. Certain mushrooms, carefully identified and processed to eliminate toxicity, are added to meat broths in quantities that create altered states of consciousness without dangerous side effects. The serving of these special foods follows elaborate protocols that transform eating into theatrical performance. Carved bone spoons and decorated wooden bowls elevate the physical act of consumption into something that feels sacred and significant. The order in which different foods are presented, the specific combinations that are consumed together, and the timing of the meal in relation to the painted images all contribute to creating experiences that bind individual band members into unified community focused on shared survival goals. The acoustic properties of the cave play crucial roles in these food-centered ceremonies. Yurok has learned to position participants so that their eating sounds, the cracking of bones, the slurping of broths, the chewing of dried meats, create rhythmic patterns that echo from the stone walls in ways that seem to emanate from the painted animals themselves. The effect creates powerful psychological impressions that the animals are participating in the feast, sharing their substance willingly with humans who honor them through proper ceremony and gratitude.
Different chambers within the cave complex serve different functions in the overall ceremonial program that Yurok has developed around food and consumption. The main gallery, with its large animal paintings, serves for major seasonal celebrations when the entire band gathers to honor successful hunts or abundant gathering expeditions. Smaller alcoves provide intimate settings for individual or family ceremonies related to specific food sources. A hunter might visit the chamber dedicated to deer imagery before embarking on a difficult hunt, consuming specially prepared venison while contemplating the painted scenes that show proper hunting techniques and attitudes. The creation of new paintings follows seasonal rhythms that correspond to the band's food procurement activities. After successful mammoth hunts, Yurok creates images that capture the drama and abundance of these rare but transformative events. The mammoth paintings are among the most complex and emotionally powerful images in the cave, showing not just the animals themselves, but the entire community working together in the massive processing operations that mammoth hunting requires. The preservation of the cave paintings requires ongoing maintenance and care that Yurok performs with the dedication of a priest tending sacred objects. The fat lamps that provide illumination must be carefully managed to prevent soot buildup that could obscure the images. Moisture levels within the cave must be monitored and controlled to prevent damage to the pigments. New paintings must be planned and positioned to complement existing images without overwhelming the overall composition or disrupting the acoustic properties that make the cave function as a ceremonial space. The social implications of Yurok's artistic activities extend far beyond their immediate ceremonial functions.
The time and resources required for creating and maintaining the cave paintings represent significant investments by the entire band, requiring consensus that artistic activity contributes sufficiently to survival to justify diverting labor and materials from more direct food procurement activities. The existence of the cave creates territorial identity for the band, establishing connection to place that goes beyond simple resource exploitation to encompass spiritual and cultural ownership. The psychological impact of consuming food within this sacred space creates associations between nutrition and transcendence that transform eating from mere biological necessity into cultural activity loaded with meaning and significance. The rituals that Uruk has developed around food consumption establish patterns of gratitude, community cooperation, and environmental stewardship that will influence human relationship with food resources for thousands of years to come. In learning to honor their food sources through art and ceremony, these SH peoples take crucial steps toward the complex cultural practices that distinguish human societies from other animal communities. Through Uruk's innovations in combining art, ceremony, and food consumption, you witness the emergence of cultural practices that transform basic survival activities into foundations for community identity, spiritual practice, and knowledge preservation. The cave becomes more than shelter or storage space. It becomes humanity's first temple, where the most basic human need becomes the foundation for sophisticated cultural and spiritual development that will eventually encompass all aspects of human civilization. Thousands of years after Uruk's cave paintings fade into archaeological mystery, the evidence of Ice Age food practices emerges from the earth and forms that challenge and intrigue modern researchers. You find yourself standing alongside Dr.
Elena Marchetti, a zooarchaeologist whose weathered hands brush soil from a collection of bones that tell stories their original users never intended to preserve. The excavation site, nestled in a river valley that once teemed with Ice Age life, reveals layer upon layer of human food consumption spanning millennia, each stratum containing puzzles that force researchers to reconsider everything they thought they understood about prehistoric cuisine. The bones emerging from the archaeological layers present immediate mysteries that Dr. Marchetti and her team struggle to interpret. Mammoth femurs show evidence of sophisticated butchering techniques that go far beyond simple meat removal. Precise cuts that suggest the bones themselves were being processed for specific purposes that remain unclear. Some bones show burn patterns that indicate controlled heating rather than simple roasting, suggesting cooking techniques that modern science has yet to fully understand. Others display wear patterns that suggest they were used as tools after being processed for food, indicating levels of resource utilization that challenge assumptions about prehistoric waste in efficiency. The spatial organization of bone deposits within the site reveals cooking and food processing areas that demonstrate remarkable sophistication in prehistoric food preparation. Distinct zones show evidence of different types of food processing activities, areas where bones were systematically broken for marrow extraction, spaces where meat was cut and prepared for preservation, and specialized locations where cooking fires were maintained at specific temperatures for extended periods of time. The precision of this organization suggests meal preparation systems that were far more complex and purposeful than simple roasting meat over open flames.
Carbon isotope analysis of ancient bones provides insights into Ice Age diets that overturn previous assumptions about prehistoric nutrition. The chemical signatures preserved in bone collagen reveal dietary patterns that included significant marine resources even at inland sites hundreds of miles from any ocean. These findings suggest either extensive trade networks that brought seafood far inland or seasonal migration patterns that brought Ice Age peoples to coastal areas for parts of the year. The implications force researchers to reconsider the mobility and social organization of prehistoric groups. The discovery of cooking stones with residue analysis capabilities opens new windows into understanding prehistoric food preparation techniques. Microscopic examination of stone surfaces reveal traces of plant materials that were processed using methods that enhanced their nutritional value or made them safer for consumption. Some stones show evidence of repeated heating and cooling cycles that suggest sophisticated slow cooking techniques, while others display wire patterns that indicate they were used for grinding and processing foods in ways that modern cultures have largely forgotten. Dr. Marchetti's analysis of cut marks on ancient bones reveals butchering techniques that demonstrate intimate knowledge of animal functional anatomy, and optimal meat processing methods. The precision and consistency of these cuts suggest standardized techniques that were passed down through generations of practitioners, indicating formal training systems for food processing skills. Some cut marks show evidence of tool use that goes beyond simple stone knives, suggesting composite tools or specialized implements that were designed specifically for efficient meat processing.
The preservation of organic materials in certain site conditions provides rare glimpses into the plant components of Ice Age diets that are usually lost to decay. Preserved seeds, pollen, and plant fibers reveal sophisticated understanding of seasonal plant cycles and processing techniques that extracted maximum nutrition from available vegetation. Some plant remains show evidence of deliberate cultivation or management practices that suggest Ice Age peoples were manipulating their environment to increase food production rather than simply gathering whatever nature provided. The analysis of cooking hearths reveals fire management techniques that were far more sophisticated than simple wood burning. Different types of fuel materials were used for different cooking purposes: specific woods for smoking meat, dried dung for slow, even heating, and specialized plant materials for flavoring or preservation purposes. The archaeological evidence suggests that Ice Age cooks understood the relationship between fuel choice and food quality in ways that modern backyard chefs might find surprisingly advanced. Microscopic analysis of food residues on ancient pottery fragments, where preserved, reveals recipes and cooking techniques that demonstrate remarkable culinary sophistication. Some vessels show evidence of being used for fermenting plant materials, suggesting that Ice Age peoples understood and utilized fermentation processes for food preservation and flavor enhancement. Others display residue patterns that indicate they were used for rendering fat or processing plant materials through techniques that required precise temperature control and timing. The distribution patterns of different bone types within living sites provide insights into food sharing and social organization that reveal complex cultural practices around food consumption.
Certain high-value bones, such as those containing the richest marrow, show distribution patterns that suggest they were shared according to specific social protocols rather than simple individual consumption. The archaeological evidence indicates that food sharing followed sophisticated rules that reflected status, age, kinship relationships, and contribution to food procurement activities. Taphonomic analysis of bone assemblages reveals evidence of food storage and cache systems that demonstrate long-term planning and resource management capabilities. Some bone deposits show evidence of deliberate burial and retrieval, suggesting that Ice Age peoples created emergency food stores that could be accessed during times of scarcity. The sophistication of these storage systems, including methods for protecting cache foods from scavengers and environmental damage, indicates planning horizons that extended far beyond immediate survival needs. The discovery of bone tools specifically designed for food processing reveals technological innovations that were dedicated entirely to improving nutrition extraction and food preparation efficiency. Specialized marrow extractors, hide scrapers designed for food preparation rather than tool making, and composite implements that combine multiple functions in single tools demonstrate that Ice Age peoples invested significant time and creativity in developing technologies specifically for food-related activities. Comparative analysis of bone assemblages from different time periods within the same site reveals evolutionary changes in food processing techniques and dietary preferences over thousands of years. Earlier layers show evidence of more opportunistic hunting and gathering patterns, while later deposits indicate increasingly sophisticated resource management and food processing techniques. These changes suggest that Ice Age peoples were continuously innovating and improving their food procurement and processing methods rather than simply maintaining static traditional practices. As Dr.
Marchetti carefully documents each bone fragment and stone tool, cataloging the evidence of Ice Age food systems that will never be fully understood. You begin to appreciate the vast complexity of prehistoric life that archaeology can only glimpse in fragments. Each bone tells part of a story about people who faced the same fundamental challenge that confronts all living creatures: finding enough to eat, but who developed solutions of remarkable sophistication and effectiveness. The archaeological evidence reveals that Ice Age peoples were not primitive survivors struggling against hostile environments, but skilled practitioners of complex food systems that sustained human communities for thousands of years. The mysteries preserved in these ancient bone kitchens continue to challenge researchers and inspire new questions about prehistoric life. Each new analytical technique reveals additional layers of complexity in Ice Age food systems, demonstrating that human ingenuity and adaptability in the face of subsistence challenges goes back to the very earliest periods of our species' development. The bones that once provided nutrition for Ice Age families now provide knowledge that enriches our understanding of human cultural evolution and the deep roots of our complex relationship with food
and the environment that sustains us. The challenge of reconstructing Ice Age cuisine from archaeological fragments requires a unique blend of scientific analysis, experimental archaeology, and educated speculation that pushes the boundaries of traditional research methods. You find yourself in the laboratory of Dr. Marchetti,
Marcus Anderson, an experimental archaeologist whose passion for understanding prehistoric food preparation has led him to develop revolutionary techniques for recreating ancient recipes using only ingredients and methods that would have been available to Ice Age peoples. His work represents one of the most ambitious attempts ever undertaken to bridge the gap between archaeological evidence and actual lived experience of prehistoric food consumption. Dr. Anderson's laboratory combines modern scientific equipment with reconstructed Ice Age tools and cooking facilities, creating a unique environment where ancient techniques can be tested and refined using contemporary analytical methods. Stone-lined hearths built according to archaeological specifications provide controlled cooking environments where temperature, fuel consumption, and cooking times can be precisely measured and documented. Reconstructed stone tools, knapped by expert flint knappers using traditional techniques, allow for authentic food processing experiences that reveal the skill levels and time investments required for different aspects of Ice Age food preparation. The process of reconstructing an Ice Age recipe begins with careful analysis of archaeological evidence to determine what ingredients would have been available in specific times and places, what cooking technologies existed, and what processing techniques were employed. Bone chemistry analysis provides insights into the nutritional composition of Ice Age diets, while microscopic examination of stone tools reveals traces of plant and animal materials that were processed using different implements. The integration of this evidence creates starting points for experimental recreation of specific dishes and cooking techniques. One of Dr. Anderson's most successful reconstruction projects involves recreating mammoth stew based on evidence from a 30,000-year-old archaeological site.
The project required extensive research into mammoth anatomy and meat quality, experimentation with period-appropriate cooking vessels and techniques, and careful attention to the seasonal availability of plant ingredients that would have been added to enhance flavor and nutrition. The resulting recipe, when prepared using authentic methods and ingredients, produces a dish that provides insights into both the practical nutrition and sensory experience of Ice Age cooking. One particularly intriguing reconstruction involves recreating Ice Age bread made from wild grain seeds and root starches. Archaeological evidence suggests that various seeds and roots were ground into flour-like substances that were mixed with fat and formed into cakes that could be cooked on hot stones or buried in coals. The experimental recreation of these proto-breads reveals baking techniques that produce nutritious, portable foods with surprisingly complex flavors and textures. The breads could be stored for extended periods without spoilage, making them valuable components of traveling rations for hunting expeditions or seasonal migrations. The fermentation of plant materials represents one of the most sophisticated aspects of Ice Age food processing that Dr. Anderson's research has uncovered. Archaeological evidence suggests that certain plant materials were deliberately fermented to improve their nutritional value, enhance their flavor, or reduce their toxicity. Experimental recreation of these fermentation processes reveals knowledge of bacterial and yeast cultures that rivals the understanding possessed by traditional societies well into the historical period. The fermented plant foods that result from these processes provide enhanced nutrition and distinctive flavors that would have added significant variety to Ice Age diets.
The social aspects of Ice Age food preparation emerged through experimental recreation of cooking techniques that required cooperation between multiple individuals. Large-scale food processing operations, such as the butchering and preservation of mammoth carcasses, required coordinated effort between specialists with different skills. Dr. Anderson's team recreation of these processes reveals the time investments and skill levels required, providing insights into how food-related activities shaped social organization and cultural development in Ice Age communities. The tool requirements for Ice Age cooking reveal the technological sophistication that supported complex food preparation systems. Specialized implements for different aspects of food processing were carefully designed and manufactured to optimize efficiency and results. Stone knives were shaped for specific cutting tasks. Bone tools were crafted for marrow extraction and fat processing, and cooking vessels were designed to maximize heat transfer and minimize fuel consumption. The investment in specialized food preparation tools demonstrate the importance that Ice Age peoples placed on optimizing their food systems. As Dr. Anderson completes another experimental cooking session, carefully documenting the results and comparing them with archaeological evidence, you begin to understand how the reconstruction of Ice Age cuisine
provides insights that go far beyond simple curiosity about what prehistoric peoples ate. The experimental recreation of ancient recipes reveals the knowledge systems, social organization, and cultural values that shaped human food systems during our species' formative period. These reconstructed dishes provide tangible connections to our prehistoric ancestors, demonstrating the continuity of human creativity and ingenuity in transforming basic survival needs into sources of pleasure, community bonding, and cultural expression.
The ongoing research into Ice Age cuisine continues to reveal new dimensions of prehistoric life and culture, demonstrating that food systems have always been central to human social organization and cultural development. Each successfully reconstructed recipe provides evidence of human adaptability and innovation that has enabled our species to thrive in diverse environments throughout our history. The flavors and techniques that Dr. Anderson recreates in his laboratory represent living connections to the deep past, reminding us that the fundamental human relationship with food encompasses not just nutrition, but pleasure, creativity, and community across all periods of our species' development. In the shadow of towering cliffs that overlook a vast river valley rich with game, you encounter a different kind of Ice Age society, one where successful hunting has created social stratification and elaborate feast cultures that distinguish between those who eat well and those who survive on scraps. Here, in the settlement of the Valdris clan, the most accomplished hunters have evolved into something approaching an aristocracy, their superior skills in tracking and killing large game translating it to social status that is measured in the abundance and quality of food they can provide for their followers and display at ceremonial gatherings. Borag the Spearfinder stands at the center of this elite hunting culture, his massive frame draped in the finest furs and his weapons crafted from materials that speak to success on a scale that dwarfs the achievements of ordinary hunters.
His spear points are carved from mammoth ivory traded from distant volcanic regions, while his clothing combines the pelts of cave lions, dire wolves, and arctic foxes in displays of hunting prowess that serve as both practical protection and symbols of status. His very presence in the settlement changes the social dynamics of food distribution and consumption, as his followers compete for his attention and approval through gifts of choice foods and demonstrations of their own, lesser hunting abilities. The feast culture that has evolved around Borok and the other elite hunters represents a transformation of basic survival activities into elaborate social theaters, where food becomes the medium for displaying power, building alliances, and maintaining hierarchical relationships that extend far beyond simple nutrition. These ceremonial feasts require months of preparation and planning, with specialized hunting expeditions organized specifically to procure rare and prestigious foods that cannot be obtained through ordinary subsistence activities. The social pressure to provide increasingly elaborate and impressive feasts drives hunters to take greater risks and invest enormous resources in pursuits that go far beyond basic survival needs. The preparation for one of Borok's seasonal feasts begins weeks in advance, as his hunting parties range far into dangerous territories to pursue the rare and difficult prey that will distinguish his table from those of lesser hunters. Cave bear, with their massive size and dangerous temperament, represent the ultimate hunting challenge and the most prestigious meat that can be served at elite gatherings.
The successful hunting of cave bear requires not just exceptional skill and courage, but also specialized equipment and hunting strategies that few possess the knowledge or resources to attempt. The processing and preparation of prestigious foods for elite feasts requires techniques and knowledge that go far beyond ordinary food preparation methods. The meat from rare and dangerous animals must be treated with special care to enhance its natural flavors and create presentations that emphasize its rarity and the skill required to obtain it. Cave bear meat, with its distinctive flavor and massive size, is prepared using slow roasting techniques that require days of careful fire management and constant attention to timing and temperature control. The ceremonial aspects of elite feasting involve elaborate protocols for food presentation and consumption that transform eating into theatrical performance designed to reinforce social hierarchies and create memorable experiences that enhance the host's reputation. Borak's feast feature carefully orchestrated sequences of food presentation with different courses served in specific orders that build anticipation and emphasize the abundance and variety of foods available. The most prestigious items, such as cave bear steaks or mammoth tongue, are reserved for the climactic moments of the feast, when all attention is focused on the host's generosity and success. The serving implements and dining arrangements at elite feasts represent significant investments in specialized equipment designed specifically for ceremonial food consumption.
Carved bone balls, decorated with intricate designs that tell stories of successful hunts, elevate the simple act of eating into an experience that connects participants to the heroic achievements that made the feast possible.
Specialized serving tools, crafted from rare materials and decorated with symbols of hunting prowess, transform food service into ritualized performance that reinforces the status and authority of the host. The social dynamics of elite feasting involve complex negotiations over seating arrangements, portion sizes, and food choices that reflect and reinforce the hierarchical relationships within the community. Borath's closest hunting companions receive the choicest cuts and most prestigious foods, while lesser followers receive portions that acknowledge their status while demonstrating their dependence on the elite hunter's success. The distribution of foods at these feasts serves as a form of social communication that establishes relationships, rewards loyalty, and demonstrates the consequences of social position within the hunting hierarchy. The competitive aspects of elite hunting culture drive continuous innovation in hunting techniques, weapon technology, and food preparation methods as successful hunters seek to maintain their status through increasingly impressive achievements. Borath must constantly prove his superiority through more dangerous hunts, more elaborate feasts, and more impressive displays of abundance that distinguish his accomplishments from those of rivals who aspire to challenge his position. This competition drives technological and cultural innovation that benefits the entire community, while creating pressures that can lead to dangerous risk-taking and resource waste. The technological innovations driven by elite hunting competition include developments in weapon design, tracking techniques, and food processing methods that eventually benefit the entire community through knowledge sharing and technological diffusion. Borath's pursuit of hunting excellence drives him to experiment with new spear designs, develop more effective tracking methods, and create improved food preservation techniques that represent advances over traditional methods.
These innovations gradually spread to other hunters through apprenticeship programs and social interaction, raising the overall capabilities of the community. The legacy of elite hunting culture extends beyond its immediate social and cultural impacts to encompass the technological innovations, social institutions, and cultural practices that emerge from the competitive pursuit of hunting excellence. The weapons, techniques, and organizational methods developed by elite hunters represent advances that benefit entire communities while creating models for social organization that will influence human societies throughout their subsequent development. Through the elaborate feasts and social ceremonies that celebrate hunting success, these Ice Age communities create cultural traditions that transform basic survival activities into foundations for complex social and cultural development. Far from the abundant feasts and social ceremonies of the elite hunters, on the windswept edges of territories where only the hardiest vegetation grows and game is scarce, you encounter a different reality of Ice Age existence. Here, in the marginal lands that successful hunters avoid, live those who have been cast out from the prosperous settlements, or who never possessed the skills necessary to thrive in the competitive world of elite hunting culture. These outcasts, led by a weathered woman called Nira the Gatherer, represent the other side of Ice Age social stratification, those who must survive on scraps, failed hunts, and the careful exploitation of resources that others overlook or disdain. Nira moves through the sparse landscape with the careful economy of movement that comes from chronic undernourishment, her thin frame wrapped in patched furs that speak to years of making do with inferior materials and limited resources.
Her tools are improvised from broken implements discarded by more successful hunters, repaired and modified with desperate ingenuity to serve purposes their original makers never intended. Her knowledge of survival techniques extends far beyond that possessed by elite hunters, encompassing intimate familiarity with every marginal food source that can sustain life when preferred resources are unavailable or inaccessible. The daily routine of survival for Nira's small band of outcasts involves systematic exploitation of food sources that successful hunters ignore as unworthy of attention. Insects, larvae, and other invertebrates provide protein that, while requiring patience and persistence to collect in meaningful quantities, offers nutrition that can mean the difference between survival and starvation. The gathering of these small protein sources requires specialized knowledge of insect behavior patterns, seasonal availability, and processing techniques that render them palatable and safe for consumption. The plant foods that sustain marginal communities like Nira's require processing techniques that go far beyond those employed by more prosperous groups who can afford to be selective about their food sources. Bitter roots that elite hunters would reject as inedible become valuable nutrition sources when properly processed through multiple stages of grinding, leaching, and cooking that remove toxic compounds while preserving essential nutrients. Tree bark, normally considered emergency food at best, provides carbohydrates and fiber that can sustain life when processed using techniques that break down tough cellulose into more digestible forms.
The social dynamics within Nira's outcast band differ dramatically from those found in elite hunting communities, reflecting the desperate cooperation required for survival when resources are scarce and every individual's contribution is essential for group survival.
Unlike the hierarchical relationships that characterize successful hunting groups, the outcast must maintain egalitarian social structures where food sharing follows principles of desperate mutual aid rather than status-based distribution. Every scrap of food, every successful discovery of edible materials becomes common property that is distributed according to immediate need rather than social position. The shelter and living conditions of the outcast band reflect their marginal status and limited access to quality materials. Their temporary structures are constructed from materials that more successful groups have discarded or deemed inadequate: broken bones, damaged hides, and gathered brush that provides minimal protection against the harsh elements. The maintenance of even these inadequate shelters requires constant effort and improvisation as materials wear out and must be replaced with whatever inferior substitutes can be found or salvaged. The psychological stress of living constantly on the edge of starvation affects every aspect of social interaction within Nira's band. The anxiety of never knowing where the next meal will come from creates tensions that must be carefully managed to prevent conflicts that could destroy the cooperation essential for survival. Sleep is often disrupted by hunger pangs and worry about future food sources, leading to chronic fatigue that makes survival tasks more difficult and dangerous. The constant focus on immediate survival needs leaves little mental energy for the cultural activities and social development that characterize more prosperous communities. The seasonal challenges faced by outcast communities are amplified by their marginal status and limited resources.
During harsh winter months, when even successful hunters struggle to find adequate food, the outcasts must rely on survival techniques that push the boundaries of what human physiology can endure. Extended periods of near starvation become routine experiences that test the limits of human resilience while building intimate knowledge of how to extract nutrition from the most marginal food sources available. The medical challenges of chronic undernourishment create health problems that further compromise the band's ability to procure food and maintain basic survival activities. Malnutrition weakens immune systems and reduces physical strength, making individuals more susceptible to injuries and illnesses that could be manageable under better nourished conditions. The lack of fat reserves means that even minor illnesses can quickly become life-threatening as the body has no nutritional buffer to draw upon during periods of reduced food intake. The water procurement challenges faced by outcast communities reflect their exclusion from the best water sources that are claimed and defended by more powerful groups. Nira's band must rely on marginal water sources that may be contaminated, difficult to access, or available only during certain seasons. The processing of questionable water through boiling and filtration techniques becomes essential for preventing waterborne illnesses that could devastate an already vulnerable population. The innovative food processing techniques developed by outcast communities represent some of the most sophisticated survival knowledge possessed by Ice Age peoples. The necessity of extracting nutrition from marginal and often unpalatable food sources drives experimentation with processing methods that transform inedible materials into sustenance.
Fermentation techniques allow the preservation and detoxification of plant materials that would otherwise be unusable, while specialized cooking methods can make even the toughest and most unappetizing ingredients digestible and nutritious. The preservation of food by outcast communities requires different approaches than those employed by groups with access to abundant resources. Small quantities of food must be preserved using techniques that maximize nutritional retention while minimizing losses to spoilage or pests. Emergency cache systems must be established and maintained to provide backup food sources during periods when normal foraging yields are insufficient for survival. The environmental knowledge possessed by outcast communities like Nira's encompasses intimate understanding of marginal ecosystems and survival resources that escape the attention of more prosperous groups. This knowledge includes detailed understanding of which insects are most nutritious and how to locate them, which plants provide emergency nutrition and how to process them safely, and which environmental conditions indicate opportunities for finding overlooked food sources. As you observe Nira leading her small band through another day of desperate foraging, carefully processing meager findings into the minimal nutrition necessary for survival, you begin to understand how life on the margins of Ice Age society creates its own forms of knowledge, innovation, and resilience that complement and sometimes surpass the achievements of more prosperous communities. The survival techniques developed by outcast groups represent human adaptability and ingenuity pushed to their absolute limits, creating solutions to survival challenges that demonstrate the remarkable range of strategies that humans can develop when faced with extreme adversity.
The legacy of marginal survival strategies extends beyond their immediate survival value to encompass innovations and knowledge systems that benefit human communities throughout their development. The processing techniques developed for marginal foods, the resource management strategies created for scarce environments, and the social cooperation methods necessary for survival under extreme conditions represent advances in human knowledge that contribute to our species' overall adaptability and resilience in the face of environmental challenges and resource limitations. The harsh winter that brings together the elite hunters of Borak's clan and the desperate outcasts led by Nira creates one of the most remarkable social transformations recorded in Ice Age oral traditions. As the coldest season in living memory grips the land with unprecedented severity, even the most successful hunting territories become barren wastelands where large game cannot survive, forcing a convergence of social groups that would normally maintain strict separation. The abundance that once distinguished elite outcast evaporates in the face of environmental catastrophe that threatens all human life in the region, creating conditions where survival depends not on status or hunting prowess, but on the collaborative application of every survival technique possessed by any member of the combined communities. The first contact between these radically different social groups occurs when Borak's scouts, ranging far from their traditional territories in search of any remaining game, encounter Nira's band methodically working a grove of birch trees for inner bark and insect larvae.
The initial confrontation embodies all the tensions and prejudices that separate elite from outcast. Borak's followers view Nira's activities with disgust and contempt, while the outcasts display the wary defensiveness of those accustomed to persecution and exclusion. But as the scouts report their findings to Borak, the reality of his own dwindling food stores forces a recognition that the survival techniques he has previously scorned may represent his people's only hope for surviving the unprecedented crisis. The negotiation that follows represents one of the most complex social agreements recorded in Ice Age tradition, as two groups with radically different values, social structures, and survival strategies attempt to create cooperative arrangements that can benefit both communities without destroying the cultural identities that define them. Borak must overcome his lifetime of conditioning that equates high-status hunting with successful leadership, while Nira must navigate the dangerous waters of negotiating with those who possess the power to enslave or destroy her people if the collaboration fails to meet their expectations. The knowledge exchange that begins to emerge from this forced cooperation reveals the complementary nature of elite and marginal survival strategies, demonstrating how the specialized techniques developed by each group address different aspects of the total survival challenge. Borak's hunters possess unmatched skills in tracking, weapon making, and large game processing that remain valuable even when large game is scarce, while Nira's outcasts have developed sophisticated techniques for finding and processing marginal food sources that become critically important when preferred resources are unavailable.
The first collaborative food procurement expedition combines Borak's organizational abilities and leadership experience with Nira's intimate knowledge of marginal resources and processing techniques. The resulting operation demonstrates efficiencies that neither group could achieve independently. Borak's hunters provide the physical strength and coordination necessary for intensive resource exploitation, while Nira's people contribute the specialized knowledge needed to identify and properly process foods that the elite hunters would never have recognized as edible. The social tensions that emerge during this collaboration reflect the deep cultural differences between groups that have developed radically different approaches to survival and social organization. Borak's followers struggle to accept direction from individuals they have been conditioned to view as inferior, while Nira's people must overcome their learned distrust of those who represent the social systems that have excluded and oppressed them. The success of the collaboration depends on the ability of both leaders to manage these tensions while maintaining focus on the survival needs that make cooperation essential. The technological diffusion that continues after the initial collaboration spreads innovations throughout the region as other groups observe the success of the combined community and seek to adopt similar techniques and social arrangements. The tools, techniques, and organizational methods developed during the collaboration become models that influence survival strategies across wide geographical areas, creating cultural changes that extend far beyond the immediate participants in the original cooperation.
The establishment of permanent institutions that formalize the cooperation between elite and marginal groups creates lasting frameworks for social organization that can accommodate diversity in skills, resources, and social backgrounds while maintaining community cohesion and effectiveness.
These institutions provide mechanisms for continued knowledge sharing, resource allocation, and conflict resolution that enable the combined community to function effectively under both crisis and normal conditions. The educational systems that develop to train new community members in the integrated survival techniques ensure that the innovations and social arrangements created during the collaboration are preserved and transmitted to future generations. These educational programs combine traditional apprenticeship methods from both cultures with new approaches that emphasize the complementary nature of different survival strategies and the importance of flexibility and adaptation in the face of changing conditions. As you observe the transformed community that has emerged from the forced collaboration between elite hunters and desperate outcasts, you witness one of humanity's earliest examples of how crisis can drive social innovation and cultural evolution. The breakdown of rigid social barriers and the integration of diverse survival strategies create more resilient and adaptable communities that are better equipped to face future challenges. The collaboration demonstrates how human survival and flourishing depend not just on individual skills or group solidarity, but on the ability to transcend cultural boundaries and combine different approaches to create solutions that are more effective than any single tradition could provide. The long-term implications of this great convergence extend beyond immediate survival benefits to encompass fundamental changes in human social organization and cultural development. The recognition that survival security depends on the integration of diverse skills and knowledge systems creates foundations for more inclusive and cooperative societies that can harness human diversity as a source of strength rather than division.
The models of leadership, resource allocation, and social cooperation that emerge from this collaboration provide templates for future social development that emphasize adaptability, inclusivity, and the creative combination of different traditions and approaches. Through the transformation of two radically different communities into a unified and more capable society, you see how food, the most basic human need, becomes the catalyst for social evolution and cultural innovation that shapes the development of human civilization. The collaboration that begins as a desperate response to environmental crisis evolves into a permanent transformation that creates new possibilities for human social organization and cooperative achievement, demonstrating how the challenges of survival can drive innovations that extend far beyond their immediate survival functions to encompass all aspects of human cultural and social development. As our journey through the frozen landscapes of Ice Age cuisine draws to its gentle close, you can allow your mind to drift back to the warmth and safety of your modern world, where refrigerated abundance awaits at the touch of a button, and the complex flavors of global cuisine represent choices rather than desperate necessities. Yet the echoes of ancient hunger continue to resonate through the comfortable darkness of your evening, carrying with them the profound understanding that every bite you take connects you to an unbroken chain of human ingenuity, cooperation, and survival that stretches back through 40,000 years of shared meals and common struggles.
The stories we have followed tonight, from Keith's patient tracking across the tundra to Asha's innovations in mammoth preservation, from Yurok's sacred cave paintings to the collaborative breakthroughs that united elite and outcast communities, represent far more than historical curiosities or primitive survival techniques. They reveal the foundational experiences that shaped our species' relationship with food, environment, and each other, creating patterns of innovation, cooperation, and cultural development that continue to influence human societies today. The hunger that drove our Ice Age ancestors to develop sophisticated preservation techniques, complex social organizations, and innovative processing methods represents the same fundamental human drive that creates modern agriculture, culinary arts, and global food systems. The nutritional challenges that forced Ice Age peoples to become intimate experts in their environments, understanding the seasonal cycles of plants and animals with precision that modern science is only beginning to appreciate, established the observational and experimental traditions that would eventually evolve into systematic agriculture and food science. The preservation techniques that Asha pioneered for mammoth processing contain the seeds of all subsequent food preservation technologies, from simple drying and smoking to the complex industrial processes that maintain global food supplies today. The social cooperation that mammoth hunting required created organizational models that would eventually develop into the complex economic and political systems that coordinate modern food production and distribution.
The artistic and ceremonial traditions that Yurok developed around food consumption demonstrate how humans have always understood that eating involves far more than simple nutrition. It encompasses community bonding, cultural identity, spiritual practice, and aesthetic pleasure that transform basic biological necessity into one of the primary foundations of human culture and civilization. The cave paintings that celebrated successful hunts and honored the animals that provided sustenance represent humanity's first steps toward the complex symbolic systems that govern modern relationships between food production, environmental stewardship, and cultural expression. The social stratification that emerged around hunting success in Bork's elite culture reveals both the opportunities and dangers that arise when food abundance creates surplus that can support specialized roles and complex social hierarchies. The feast traditions that developed around prestigious hunting achievements establish patterns of celebration, competition, and status display that continue to influence human social organization, while also demonstrating the environmental and social costs that can result when food systems become disconnected from sustainability and equity concerns. The survival innovations that Nidros' outcast community developed under conditions of extreme scarcity represent humanity's remarkable capacity for adaptation and resourcefulness in the face of adversity. The processing techniques that could transform virtually inedible materials into life-sustaining nutrition demonstrate the ingenuity and determination that enable human survival under conditions that would defeat most other species. These marginal survival strategies create backup knowledge systems that provide essential resources during times of crisis, ensuring that human communities possess the flexibility and resilience necessary for long-term survival and development.
The great convergence that brought together elite and marginal communities during environmental crises illustrates how shared challenges can break down social barriers and create innovations that surpass anything that isolated communities could achieve independently. The collaborative food procurement and processing systems that emerge from this forced cooperation represent early examples of the inclusive and diverse approaches that characterize the most successful modern food systems, demonstrating how cultural diversity and social cooperation create synergies that benefit entire communities. As sleep begins to claim your consciousness and the gentle rhythms of your breathing slow toward peaceful rest, you can carry with you the profound understanding that every meal represents a victory against the ancient hunger that shaped our species' development. The food that nourishes your body connects you to 40,000 years of human struggle, innovation, and cooperation, reminding you that even in the comfort and abundance of the modern world, you remain part of the great human adventure that began when our ancestors first learned to transform the frozen wilderness into sustenance, community, and hope for the future. Sleep well, dear listener, knowing that you are safe and warm and well-fed, protected by the accumulated wisdom of countless generations who faced far greater challenges with courage, ingenuity, and the unshakable human conviction that tomorrow's meal will somehow be found, processed, and shared with those who matter most. Their legacy lives on in every bite you take, every meal you share, and every moment of gratitude you feel for the abundance that their struggles and innovations have made possible.